It's time for RealAg Radio on Rural Radio Channel 147 on Sirius XM. RealAg Radio and RealAgriculture.com is your home for insight and analysis of the issues that are impacting your farm business. Let's get real and get connected with RealAg Radio. Welcome to RealAg Radio here on Rural Radio 147, Sirius XM. Sean Haney, your host here on this Friday edition of the show. Thanks so much for making RealAg Radio and, of course, Rural Radio 147 a big part of your workday. Also, big shout out to everybody listening out there on the RealAg Radio podcast. It is Friday, which means we got a RealAg Issues panel today. Looking forward to having panelists Lindsay Smith, Kelvin Hepner, both of RealAgriculture here, as well as Stuart Person. He is the head of agriculture with MNP, based out of Edmonton. I'm definitely going to ride him about those Oilers and how they are really in shambles. We got a lot of stuff to talk about here today. Update on 234. Now, that is the private members bill that is stuck in the Senate. It has to do with the carbon tax on some of the farming activities. We're also going to talk about a decision that was made today from a dispute panel related to the USMCA, U.S. and Canada dairy trade. Canada definitely coming out, it looks to be a victor, at least at this stage of the battle, and a whole lot more as well. Looking forward to it. We've also got Ann Wasco here from the Gateway Livestock Exchange for a beef market update. If you have any feedback on today's show, you can always send me an email, shaney@realagriculture.com. You can find us across all the different social media platforms. As well, you can call the RealAg feedback line. Now, that number is 855-776-6147. We don't have a lot of time here in the open. I want to save room back into the show for all of our guests. So we're going to take a break, and when we come back, we've got Ann Wasco here from the Gateway Livestock Exchange.
Managing your inoculants just got easier with Lalfix Start Spherical Pulses from Lalaman Plant Care. Get increased nitrogen fixation and phosphorus availability for any pulses you grow. Its high porosity granule provides improved handling and accurate metering, so it's easy flowing and virtually dust free. It's the only inoculant you need. It's Pulse Perfect. Contact your Lalaman sales representative today.
Peter Johnson at WheatPete, RealAgriculture.com. I'm the host of The Word, and I love doing the Word. I love the questions. I love the challenges. I love having to apply agronomics to all over the globe and areas outside of my normal jurisdiction. Also, I love the feedback the most, where growers challenge me, tell me about their plot results, help me to learn. The Word, absolutely the best part of my day.
What's next for your fields? At Pioneer, delivering industry-leading genetics drives everything we do. From the scientists in the lab to our local teams with boots on the ground, we are determined to get there first. Developing top-performing products, proven in more growing conditions than ever before. Pioneer. What's next happens here. Visit pioneer.com/Canada to learn more.
It's now time for the beef market update here with RealAgriculture. We're joined by Ann Wasco, the Gateway Livestock Exchange. Ann, how are you doing?
I'm good. Good to be with you, Sean.
Absolutely. First up, this segment is brought to you by Invita. Invita bridges the nitrogen gap all season long, enabling your corn crop to fix the nitrogen it needs from the atmosphere when and where it needs it most. Let Invita set your crop up for success by requesting it from your local retailer today. Okay, Ann, let's dive into cash prices. What are we seeing here this week? In a holiday week in the U.S., I might add, which definitely has an impact on this market.
Yeah, so it's certainly been a quiet cattle week up to leading into the holiday on Thursday, but cash was non-explosive. It actually traded a buck lower ahead of the holiday. Some pretty quiet trade, as you would expect. Texas, Kansas, the southern trade, one lower at 177. The northern trade also a buck lower at 177 live, and the dress trade there was 280 delivered. So a lower across the board. A little improvement on the Wednesday night cutout ahead of the holiday, two on the choice to 297. The flex about $29 back of choice, but we'll see. Again, really quiet trade leading into the holiday. we'll be back to a full week in terms of packer kill and beef sales and all those kinds of things next week. And we'll see how these wholesale prices respond after the Thanksgiving holiday, heading into December. Certainly November's been a bit of a struggle in terms of beef movement at that wholesale level. The other thing, Sean, I just wanted to update listeners on was last week's U.S. cattle on feed report for November 1st. And after such a bearish report the previous month, this one was considered neutral to even a little bit friendly on the October placements figure. They did come in 4% larger than a year ago, but the expectation heading into the report was an up 6%. And these October placements were actually third smallest in 30 years. So again, that classic, placing more cattle on feed early that, kind of shocked that market back in September, or from the September placements. And then this one kind of back to a more friendly level. So number on feed on November 1st in the U.S. was up 2%, and that was pretty much as expected. So markets didn't bounce back everything they lost, obviously, but just wanted to update everybody on what happened there.
Yeah, right now we're seeing a lot of discussion and concern about affordability. Even though we have seen gas prices provide some relief, that's positive. Rents, the housing crisis in Canada is definitely getting a lot of attention. Rents being very strong on both sides of the border. How is all of this having potential impacts on demand? As we're almost finishing up 2023 here, which is really hard to believe. So, what are people saying to you in the wholesale market about the actual demand of beef?
Well, certainly that's always been a tough one to predict in terms of forecasting beef demand historically. And it's something, looking in the rearview mirror, we can get it, but looking forward, that one's always, because it's based on how consumers are reacting and responding to what they're seeing in the economy and on their day-to-day lives, it's hard to project. But at the same time, we can see retail prices climbing. Wholesale prices are, even though they're down from where they were, they're still record high. And certainly this has slowed, especially on the end meats. We've seen slower movement there. The middle meats, up till the holiday yesterday, were still fairly good. But those are the things that we're going to be watching and testing as we head into the end of the year in terms of how the product's moving at retail, at food service, and then don't forget, Sean, and we'll talk about it in this segment, exports are a piece of that demand figure as well. So all eyes are on that. The forecast as we go forward into 24 and 25, because of what's going on, certainly we are looking for, or the forecasts are for lower beef demand than what we've come through during COVID. So that's what the expectations are for, but just how it all pans out, that one's a tough one to predict.
Yeah, and you mentioned number of cattle being placed on feed. That's a unit number. Of course, there's a weight to that unit number. So let's talk about the carcass weights.
Yeah, and there's a lot of seasonality to carcass weights. We've talked about that before. Now, last week's carcass weight for Canada for steers just came out. It edged a wee bit lower, down to 966 pounds nationally. That's the same as what it was last year, this same week, and 20 pounds, but we're still 20 pounds above the 5-year average. So I would hope to see these weights continue to edge down from their peak 2 weeks ago to where we kind of finish out the year and even lower into January. And we get into a different class of cattle, especially in Canada, in terms of moving off of the long-fed calves to some shorter-fed yearling types, and that's typically why you're seeing this reduction in carcass weights, less days on feed. I think the other thing I just wanted to also mention as we're talking about production, packers, especially in Canada, we continue to see a large harvest of cows. The last 6 weeks have been, well over 10,000 head a week for Canada. Last week's cows slaughter made up 23% of the total slaughter, so that is increasing. Usually as we head into the first part of December, that percentage will still keep climbing. But again, just confirmation that cows in Canada are continue to move to market.
Yeah. And that's not a shocker, right?
No.
We're not surprised by some of those numbers, although we don't like to see that that's being confirmed. You mentioned exports. How is Canada stacking up in the export market when it comes to pounds of beef and the value around the world?
Yeah, well, first of all, on the tonnage piece, so that's where, in Canada, half of our demand is an export demand, and it's been lower all year long. Not a big surprise. Our production is lower, so our exports are going to be lower, or expected to be lower. And that was the case when StatsCan released the September beef exports. They were down 5% versus last year. Year to date, we're also down 5%. The biggest declines continue, and they have been all year long, Sean, coming out of the Asian markets. Japan in September was down 35% from last year. So that has been pretty consistent as we've gone through 2023. The U.S., our trade into the U.S. in September was up 2%. And again, that's kind of where it's been sitting all year long. On the flip side, our imports, and these are October numbers, into Canada, we're up 16%, and they're led by, again, the countries that have been pretty consistently sending more beef to Canada this year: Uruguay, New Zealand, and Australia. And year to date, we remain about 5% up. So for the year so far, we're down 5 on exports, we're up 5 on imports, and I suspect that pattern continues next year as our supplies get smaller in 2024.
Is there certain kinds of cuts or types of product when we look at Uruguay and Australia and those increased imports? What are we importing that we can't produce domestically, or I guess that can't come from our largest trading partner, the U.S.?
Well, one of the products that Canada is consistently short of, if you will, in terms of what our consumers demand, is hamburger-type product. Whether it's for hamburgers or hamburger-type product, or deli-type meats, or something that's going to be blended off of a trim. And so that's historically what we import, and that's certainly what's coming from Uruguay, New Zealand, and Australia. And we've had such a strong cow market in terms of prices this year that it's been a very attractive market for imports. And again, that's something that when we're short on that product's going to be the first to come in. And that 2023 has proven that true again.
That's fascinating how the market works. Okay, Ann, thanks so much for joining us. Have yourself a great weekend, and we'll chat with you in a couple weeks, okay? Okay,
thanks, Sean. You too.
That is Ann Wasco with the Gateway Livestock Exchange providing this week's beef market update. A lot happening in that market. We didn't get to it, but definitely the cattle feeder really looking at some bearish tones when it comes to some of the feed prices. Bad for the broadacre farmer, but a bit of a smile on the face for people in the livestock industry, getting some relief there from some of the high prices of the past 3 years. Okay, let's take a break. When we come back here on RealAg Radio, we're going to dive into the RealAg Issues panel, get an update on Bill 234. As well, we're going to talk about a decision that was made this morning when it comes to dairy trade between Canada and the U.S. Stay tuned. You're listening to RealAg Radio, Rural Radio 147.
As you look ahead to the next growing season, there's a lot to consider when it comes to your crop. You need every possible advantage available to you. The Pulse School on RealAgriculture.com has everything you need to make the best choice for you and your farm. On-demand videos with leading industry experts available anywhere, anytime. Go into the season confident and ready with the Pulse School on RealAgriculture.com.
As a grower, you spend a lot of time focused on the details. And sometimes it's only after harvest that you can step back and see the bigger picture. At AGI, we spend a lot of time focused on details too, making sure you can store your grain how you need to and move it when you need to. Learn more at aggrowth.com.
If you're involved in the agriculture industry, it's important to stay informed on all the latest issues affecting your business. At RealAgriculture.com, we offer fast, reliable news, information, and insights to help you keep on top of all of the latest in Canadian agriculture. Visit RealAgriculture.com and sign up for our free daily newsletter covering everything from news, agronomy, animal agriculture, and much more. Visit RealAgriculture.com/subscribe today.
And welcome back to RealAg Radio here on this Friday. It's the RealAg Issues panel. Let's bring in the team. First, it is Lindsay Smith coming out of Ottawa, Ontario. Lindsay, how are you doing?
I'm doing so well. It's been a great week. How are you?
Well, I'm good. Did you get that snowstorm that you were talking about?
Okay, we did. It was not nearly as bad as it could have been, but it was it was a little messy, a little yucky, and now we had our first actual cold. So I feel like this is real winter now. This is no longer false winter. This is real winter.
We've moved out of false winter. Now we're into real winter.
That is correct. Thank you for following along.
Well, I'll tell you, I landed in Toronto on, what night was it? Tuesday night, because I was going to the Farm Management Canada meeting that everybody heard here on Wednesday's show. And that was fun on the 401. It's like +3, +4, misty rain. It was awesome.
Yeah, I don't think it is. Great show, though, by the way.
It was fun.
I fully enjoyed it.
It was really fun.
Yeah.
Okay, also joining us here is Kelvin Hepner, coming out of Altona, Manitoba. And I know that he is probably deep in the thrusts of winter. Are you, Kelvin?
It did turn cold this week, so we finally... the last 2 weeks, it's just been a mess in terms of mud and muck, and because we had snow and cold, we had that false winter back in October, and in early November, and it turned warm, and it's finally frozen. We can finally move some grain again, and had trucks going around on the yard the last couple of days, so it's finally frozen. Which we don't have snow or much snow, but the ground is hard, which is welcome after that mess.
I don't know if I told the story earlier this week, but when I got to the rental car place on Tuesday night, the guy's like, "Hey, I'm going to upgrade you." I'm like, "Oh, nice. What am I upgrading to?" A Dodge Challenger. I'm like, "Really? Like a muscle sports car in this kind of weather?" He's like, "It's all-wheel drive." I'm like, "I will take it." It was
maybe he didn't like you and is like, "Here, take this."
Yeah, remember that time, Lindsay? Were you with me that time? The field day it was in Winnipeg or around Winnipeg.
Yeah.
Was it Kelvin? Was it you?
We had a meeting in Winnipeg. I remember you had this rental.
Well, I had to go to a field day in a Dodge Challenger. That's rolling up in style to a field day. Yeah. That's that thing had some power. That is not an electric vehicle. You start that thing, it rumbles, and it's pretty cool. Okay, also joining us is Stuart Person. He is the head of agriculture with MNP, based out of Edmonton. And Stuart, I'd be really not doing my job if I didn't ask you about what the heck is with the Oilers.
Hi, Sean, and hello, everybody. Yes, the Oilers have. I don't know what they're doing. I think I was having a conversation. I was out in Ontario, and somebody were asking me, how's things in Alberta? I said, well, people in Alberta are a little grumpy, but I said people in Edmonton are really grumpy. So
yeah. Quite frankly, both teams are not very good. So Flames look a little bit better. I think they're like 2 games under 500, but both are not good. So it won't surprise me if neither makes the playoffs. But
we'll just have to live in the glory of the battles of Alberta this year, I guess.
Yeah. It's like one of those things where you when you get down to this sort of place in the standings, the bottom third, it's like we may not make the playoffs, but did we beat our rival? That's kind of what it comes down to, for sure. And there's a few rivalries like that across the league, and of course across other sports as well. Okay, let's dive into it. We got big news here this morning. Kelvin, it looks like that dispute panel, and this is the second dispute panel related to the USMCA. The U.S. brought it forward, related to the Canadian allocation of dairy TRQs. The second panel has decided today that Canada will have to make no further changes on their TRQ allocations. This is going to be considered, I would think from the Canadian side, a big victory. Not necessarily sure we're winning the war, but definitely winning this battle.
Yeah, exactly. This is a clear ruling in favor of Canada's side, whereas that first report, the first complaint and dispute filed by the U.S. A year or two ago, was more of a split decision, but in the U.S. favor overall. This one is in Canada's favor, and so the Canadian government, Dairy Farmers of Canada, welcoming this ruling today. This basically, after that first ruling, Canada tweaked its TRQ, its tariff rate quota allocation a bit, and the U.S. wasn't happy with how far those changes went, and so they tried to refine and expand that case with this second dispute settlement file or request. And so now this panel has, and this panel, I believe the panel consists of 3 members, 1 from each country usually, and they have ruled. There was one part of it that there was a split decision where two of them ruled in favor of Canada's side, one ruled in favor of the U.S., but overall, the U.S. side, U.S. dairy groups, U.S. Ag Secretary Tom Vilsack, Catherine Tai, all issuing statements this morning saying that they're disappointed with the findings. And like you said, Sean, this isn't the end of this, as of course we have the renewal of the Canada-U.S.-Mexico trade agreement coming up in 2026. And so this will certainly be on the list of issues that need to be sorted out or addressed in that process.
Yeah, in terms of what is next, the National Milk Producers Federation and the U.S. Dairy Export Council issued a joint statement and admitting that the panel ruled in favor of Canada, but you read through the whole release, and it is a lengthy one. It says, we urge Ambassador Tai and Secretary Vilsack to look at all available options to ensure that Canada stops playing games and respects what was negotiated. Stuart, this is going to be kind of a test of the trade relations between our two countries here, whether the U.S. maybe takes some sort of retaliatory measure, or I guess, do they just wait for 2026 for the renegotiation of the trade agreement, period?
Yeah, I mean, let's just hope they were testing to see where they could go or where they could get to, and maybe this goes away until then. We don't need any more issues popping up in other sectors of agriculture, so hopefully they were just testing to see where the boundaries were, and now they know. And we can move forward. I think the other thing for the dairy industry is they have other issues they need to deal with. So getting this one behind them probably allows them to focus on some other issues. I know there's some, with cost of production going where it's going, I know a lot of dairy farmers are quite concerned about the profitability of their operations. And so they have some work to do to figure out how they're going to deal with that.
Yeah, dairy industry, dairy farmers in the U.S., not happy. It's not a very good market right now. And in Canada, same, hearing a lot about cost of production and where some of those margins are. Lindsay, this is why I think we're going to continue to hear heightened remarks about Bill 282 that would basically restrict Canada from any future, I guess, giving up of market access when it comes to supply management. I think today's ruling actually puts more of even more focus on that Bill 282.
Yeah, I think so. So Bill 282, exactly that, would essentially say no more access to the supply management systems can be given up in future trade deals. I do think this is now, I think it's quite apparent that this is, a long play on the supply management side to looking forward to the fact that, yes, USMCA will have this review in 2026. And this does, I think, just sort of fuel the U.S. side to say, all right, what we negotiated in the original USMCA deal, we're not seeing the full benefit of it. I would think that when this is renegotiated yet again, they are going to go after more. And so if 282 is in place, depending on who's in power, does that potentially protect some of supply management? It will all come down to who's in power at that time. And realistically, the way the calendar lines up, it may not necessarily be the Liberal government. That being said, Conservatives have protected supply management overall when they have been in power, but whether or not they'd be more willing to negotiate perhaps more access, we'd have to wait and see.
The track record, though, is the Liberals giving it up, Lindsay. Look at the EU deal, the EPP, and the USMCA. Liberal government in power when those concessions were made.
Yeah, we talked to Jim Wiesmeyer, DC policy analyst with Pro Farmer, earlier this week, and we talked about this renegotiation. And, Jim says it's really going to come down to who the players are. And so if you look at where the polls are today, it's going to be a Poilievre government versus a Trump government. And that's going to be that's going to be an interesting new dynamic for Poilievre to steer through when it comes to an issue like this one, as well as auto and steel and everything else. And we don't even know what some of the parameters are of that renegotiation at this point. So we'll definitely be talking about it as the. Sorry, go ahead.
Sure. I was just going to say, before we can move on, I don't know that we've asked this question yet, and so I want to. How do we feel about that relationship, of what that relationship might look like? Because is this going to be, like begets like and iron sharpens iron, or is this going to be butting heads and a whole bunch of posturing and peacocking all over the place? Because
I think the latter. So if I had to vote, I would choose the latter. I think it's not like the Biden and Trudeau governments have been like all
buddy.
all buddy, only on some environmental things, but it's just been quiet, and so people assume that things are going well. There's a lot of disagreements behind the scenes. I don't know what Stuart and Kelvin, what do you think?
I think a Trump presidency 2.0 is the Liberals' best chance at gaining ground on Poilievre in the polls. Like Poilievre, if Trump becomes president, Canadians, all the polling shows that Canadians in general, don't have a high opinion of Trump, and if he's south of the border, I think that's going to make people wary of voting for Poilievre. More people wary of voting for Poilievre. So I think that's the Liberals' best hope at a rebound here before the next Canadian election, which will likely happen after the U.S. election.
Well, but you could also say that if you're the Conservatives, your messaging would be, we need somebody to stand up to a Trump presidency. And the only person to do that is, this is what the Conservative messaging would be, is to have a Pierre Poilievre that will stick up for what is best. It's going to be interesting to see that play out. Stuart, any thoughts before we take a break?
Yeah, I think you're right, Sean, on that one. And the one thing that concerns me with Trump is just talking a lot of protectionist rhetoric in his speeches and stuff, right? So, and he seems to favor Mexico more than Canada when it comes to trade. So I'm a little bit worried about where we sit with him. But at the end of the day, he seems to still have a more right wing capitalist attitude. And so if it's going to be good for the U.S. and good for Canada, he'll do it. So I think Poilievre's going to have his hands full to convince him that there's certain things that are good for both of us.
Yeah, really. And Jim alluded to this in the interview, is this concern about this 10% import tariff on everything. That will have farm groups really, really pushing for, if that's what comes to fruition, really pushing for carve-outs and what that actually does look like. Hey, we need to take a break. We've got more coming up here, as well as, of course, an update on Bill 234. There's good work assignments and there's bad work assignments. Kelvin and Lindsay had to sit through the Senate debate this week. I need to apologize to them. You're listening to RealAg Radio, Rural Radio 147, Sirius XM.
Boron is an essential micronutrient for plant growth, and without boron, your crops can't absorb the macronutrients they need for higher yields. Although borates occur naturally, boron deficiency is a common soil problem. Whether in direct soil application, through fertigation, or as a foliar spray, US Borax has the right refined product for your crops. US Borax products are specifically formulated to combine with other fertilizers, lowering your application costs. Learn more at borax.com/egg.
There's a reason we call it the Corn School. Videos on everything from planter setup, weed control, field trial results, yield strategies, and so much more. The Corn School on RealAgriculture.com has the information and advice you need to help you succeed. Brought to you by Pride Seeds and BASF, Corn School episodes are available at cornschool.com, from RealAgriculture.com, or as a podcast from your favorite streaming service. Download the latest podcast today.
And welcome back to RealAg Radio here on this Friday. This segment's brought to you by Optimum Gly, new canola trait technology from Corteva Agriscience, also the sponsor of all of our Agritechnica coverage you can find at RealAgriculture.com or at the Real Agriculture YouTube channel. Like I said, Kelvin and Lindsay tuned in online to the Senate debate this week on 234. I'm sure they are not very happy with me, that kind of assignment, having to put themselves through that test of endurance. I guess, Lindsay, what do we take from it? They've debated, there's going to be a vote next week on the new amendment, and kind of life goes on here. No real progress at this point, I guess, eh?
Well, yeah, so, and Kelvin's been keeping up with some of the particulars more than I have been, but this is what we feared would potentially happen, is that they can make a new amendment or propose a new amendment, then they have to talk about the new amendment, then they can put off voting on said amendment, then if they do vote on that amendment, then they can go back and make another, and they can just draw this out and drag their feet. But there has been, and if you sat in at all this week, there has been a lot of hot air and a lot of discussion spent on issues that really have nothing to do with Bill C-234, but were somehow couched in it. So we did see there was hours of debate on the question of privilege and the accusation of bullying within the Senate. Kelvin and I were watching and texting back and forth, and I will just say it's probably the most consecutive minutes I've watched of anything happening in the Senate, and I was yelling at my laptop. There were so many things that I wish I could have said or had someone else say, because ultimately it just feels like we're getting further away from any sort of resolution, not any closer. Yeah. And it's really frustrating.
I think if this is the kind of, I guess, activity the Senate wants to engage in, and they want to play more of a role in the legislative process rather than the rubber stamp they previously were, we need to have an elected Senate. Is Kelvin crazy statement?
Well, I think the way the Senate's working these days, that's certainly something that we should be having a discussion about, because these so-called independent senators that are acting independently and on their own volition, some of them sure have a perfect voting record aligned with the government in power, the Liberal Party, and it sure looks like they're still partisan by appearance. And so, to me, we didn't have a national vote or discussion. There was no legislation passed to make this Senate work the way it is, and so we should at least be having a discussion, I think, about how the Senate's working. If they're going to be running interference on bills and changing bills that elected politicians that are in the House of Commons, members of Parliament, have voted in favor. Yeah, there needs to be a bigger discussion about Senate reform, and I know that's something that's been happening for decades, but issues like this, and also we've talked about C-282 last segment. The farm groups that are in favor of trade right now are calling on the Senate to run interference on a bill that was passed in the House of Commons. So there's this is where it gets complicated, and sometimes we want the Senate to take sides to not allow something through, and other times we don't want it to get in the way, and we think they're not supposed to. So it's a complicated discussion that needs to happen here.
Yeah, we also had the fall economic statement this week from Finance Minister Chrystia Freeland. Stuart, anything there that stuck out to you? We had comments about right to repair, underutilized housing tax. Can you give us an update on anything?
Yeah, for sure. The big one that we would have noticed is the underused housing tax. So they've tweaked the definition of who has to file, and basically what they've done there is if you're a specified Canadian corporation, partnership, or trust, you'll no longer have to file a return, which pretty much fixes the problem for a large, if not all, farm related entities in Canada, among other groups, not just farmers, but all industry for that matter. So there are some technicalities in how you define a specified Canadian corporation. So I just encourage everyone to clarify whether you are one or whether you're not. And if you're a partnership or you're a trust as well, just make sure that you're meeting the proper definitions. But for the most part, our farming clients or our farmers across Canada will now be exempt from filing, and that's for 2023. So they still have to file for 2022 if they haven't done so already. But for 2023, they'll be exempt. And then the other big thing is they lowered the penalties. They were previously $5,000 and $10,000. Now they're down to $1,000 and $2,000. So a much lower penalty if you get caught not filing.
Okay,
Stuart, this is a detailed question, but does there need to be legislation passed though for these to take effect?
Good question. Don't probably. I think with any of this stuff, they'll probably have to run it through a course. But I don't know the answer to that, Kelvin. Maybe we should check.
I wonder if there's still some uncertainty as to. I know they mentioned the specific dates of it taking effect for 2023 and the penalties for 2022, but I think I think that's something we should work on, getting some clarity on whether there's certainty there.
We are working on it as well at M&P. We'll be putting out something more official on our website shortly. Just once the team has time to digest it. It's always a little bit the devil's in the details with this kind of stuff. So we never like to go too quick on putting out anything formal, and so it will come out once we're 100% certain around what it means.
Cool. We'll stay tuned.
Yeah. Awesome. Okay, so speaking of the fall economic statement, great, my opinion, viewpoint in the hub this week. written by Sean Speer, who's appeared on this program before, hoping to maybe have him soon to talk about this very column. It's entitled "A Fiscal Reckoning is Coming for Canada," basically talking about the Harper tax cuts and the Trudeau spending are a problem. And I'll sum up the entire opinion column with the final paragraph, which is, "But this isn't a sustainable trajectory for federal policymaking. The long-run challenge for facing Canadian fiscal policy is rooted in the Harper-Trudeau gap. Some government will eventually need to solve it in one way or the other. The arithmetic is going to eventually catch up to us." Lindsay, that kind of sums up the deficit issue we have, doesn't it?
It really does, and it gives me heartburn, I won't lie. In that we are faced with, and you can put the blame wherever you want. I think most of us know where we want to put it, but exactly that. It does a great job outlining, and there are a lot of numbers in that piece, and it took me, I think I listened to it like 2 or 3 times to sort of get the gist of it. But really, it does outline the scope and scale of this problem, that we can't continue to spend like we do and have taxation how we have it. One or both have to change. And my guess is it's going to be both. It's going to be a combination of the two. Neither of those politically are terribly palatable at this point. And that's really where the rubber hits the road on this, is having a government with the chutzpah and the compassion and the forward-looking plan and the communication to sell that to Canadians. But gosh, in the long term, we're going to need it. So can somebody get working on it?
Yeah, so here's another piece here. We're going to have a reckoning. Are we prepared to pay for the size of government that we want, or are we ready to reset our expectations about the size of government to bring it in line with the rate of taxation that we're prepared to pay? Oh, well put by Mr. Speer there, Stuart.
Yeah, for sure. And I mean, the interesting part in that article is there's a graph in there that shows, kind of goes back, back to the 70s actually, and shows where the spread has been between spending and revenues as a percentage of GDP. It was really interesting to see how close both the Chrétien governments and then the Harper governments, kept those lines together. But now it's just gone off the rails. And so, yeah, it's bang on. We're either going to need some tax hikes to keep this going, or we're going to need to, find smaller government, which I would assume if we get a conservative government, they're going to look for the latter. But it may need to be a combination of both.
And some of this will be inevitable, though, with interest rates. The economic statement this week said that by 2028, Canada's debt costs are going to be over $60 billion, which is, to put that in perspective, we spend less than half of that on the armed forces this year. There's health payments, child benefits, all of these things are much smaller in scope than that. So if our debt costs are ballooning, government control, that itself is going to have to result in a bit of this reckoning happening.
Well, and part of the problem is the electorate, and Speer identifies, it's sort of identifies this, is that not just in Canada, but really all over the place, cuts in spending are not really well supported by the electorate. It's not a popular message. Now, it is with some. If you're a fiscal hawk conservative, that's what you want to hear. But that ain't the majority of people. I don't get that impression. So it's going to take some real courage, bravado, and leadership to right the ship. And because it's not necessarily what people want to hear, like, hey, this program's being cut. And honestly, our industry is right there. Like, we're fighting to hold on to what we have, to say, hey, we're the ones that are going to take it on the chin. In terms of budget cuts, that's not going to go over very well, and it's going to be a question like the government doesn't support our industry. So is that fair, Kelvin?
Well, exactly that. I think fortunately in agriculture, everybody needs food and everybody needs what we produce. But so in the big picture, we'll be okay. But yeah, government support for it, I I don't see it. We talked about this last week, the canola using the canola research cluster and the federal funding for it as an example. When you adjust it for inflation, it's basically half of what it was 10 years ago, the government support for it. So the government's not finding more money for ag programs. We heard from the minister saying that he's looking for 3% cuts right now. While 3% doesn't sound like a whole lot, but I think it's certainly going to have to could be more than that in going forward. And so, yeah, there's things and this is where Poilievre and the Conservative Party, they have this massive thing on the horizon. If the polls stay the way they are and they are voted in partly because people want to kick the Liberals and Trudeau out, they're going to have to deal with this mess. And this is how often political cycles often end up working, where center and left-leaning parties have increased spending and somebody has to come in and clean up the mess. And it's often Conservative Party and nobody likes that. And so people get upset with fiscal hawks or Conservatives want cuts to be made, but they don't want the programs that impact them and that they benefit from being cut. If you're waiting for a hip surgery and that lineup gets even longer and things like that on the healthcare side of things, for example, or other areas, that's where people aren't happy. And so I think Poilievre's team has to be already thinking about this scenario and how they're going to approach it.
Well, especially at a time where, I believe that military spending should be going up. That's how are we going to make that happen? With all this going on. Okay, we got to take a break. We've got more coming up here on the Real Ag Issues panel right after this.
Canola is more than just a pretty face in the prairie landscape. It's a big business, both here and around the world, that requires you to be informed and up to date on everything it takes to grow a successful crop. The Canola School on RealAgriculture.com has an expert library of video resources covering markets, agronomy, and more to help you grow a healthy and profitable canola crop. Visit canolaschool.com today. Brought to you by BASF Canada and Invigor Hybrid Canola.
I get to spend every day talking to farmers in the ag industry through RealAgriculture.com and RealAg Radio. But nothing is more fun than speaking to an audience live and in person. If you're planning an ag event, book a Real Agriculture speaker to make it a successful and memorable experience. Email shaney@realagriculture.com and you can book myself or any other Real Ag personality to speak at your event. Bring your audience all the fun, insight, and energy of Real Agriculture. And welcome back to Real Ag Radio. The world needs more of what Canada grows. Yes, indeed. Join agriculture industry leaders next week from across the country at Grow Canada in Calgary. Visit growcanadaconference.ca to register now. Really looking forward to the conference. I'm going to be there. I think it is on Wednesday. Yes, it is Wednesday. I'm moderating a panel. I think it's called Farming 4.0, and we got a great tech discussion. Somebody from John Deere, someone from Microsoft, as well as Shane Thomas will be on the panel. So looking forward to that next week. You can attend as well. You can go to the Grow Canada Conference by going to growcanadaconference.ca to register. Okay, now, lots happening overseas. EU, Calvin, making a decision when it comes to what we could see in terms of potential future herbicide use, maybe pulling back on this idea we're going to cut back on herbicides by substantial amounts.
Yeah, exactly. In European Parliament this week, they actually killed that legislation that has been talked about for years about reducing pesticide use. It was defeated. So this is something that farm groups certainly had been calling for, that this was overreach and going too far. Environmental groups are upset, but a bit of a pivot, I would say, in terms of the direction that the EU is headed, at least in the Parliament. So yeah, we'll see now where this goes and where the efforts are focused. But right now, this bill was defeated this week, rejected with 299 votes against, 207 in favor, and over 121 members of the European Parliament chose to abstain from voting on this. So it basically stunned environmentalists and delighted farming groups.
I would say that some activists are stunned already. Okay, Lindsay, does this take the wind out of the sails in terms of some of this discussion in Canada?
I'm sorry, I'm just recovering from the stunned comment. Okay, does it take the wind out of the sails? So, a few things, I think. To me, this isn't maybe as, I think it's important. I think it's good. Does it really take the wind out of the sails? No, in that I think, we're still going to see just as much pushback. I think it's good for those of us who understand, science-based rules and regulations, and I think this is a vote in favor of support for that. But I think, from the activist perspective, it doesn't deter them in any way, shape, or form. What I will say is maybe interesting is, and Sean, you would know better, but in watching the Agritechnica coverage and talking to, Dan Pecker and Tom Wolfe and people who were there, there was a definite sense that some of these impending rules and the farm to fork program, those sorts of things was already shaping sort of what you saw there. And there was a lot more tillage, a lot more, looking at, weed control using equipment versus herbicides. There was sort of pressure to do that, which I thought was an interesting observation. So does that still continue?
I think so.
For those of us, and that's just it, right? Is that I don't know that, from the practicality, the pragmatic side, I think you still have to keep that in your back pocket, that, just because this was defeated doesn't mean there won't be more rules and regulations that do the same thing.
Yeah, I don't know if there was more tillage. I think tillage has always been very prominent in Europe. I think, obviously there is mechanical weed removal is a lot of companies trying to find innovation in that space. I don't think it slows down because of weed resistance, right? So there's multiple things happening here that's pushing for that mechanical weed removal and trying to have as many tools out there as possible. What I also found interesting, Stuart, is that the role of plastic packaging was recently discussed with Prime Minister Trudeau, and some industries saying like this single-use plastics ban that Canada's been engaged in is creating some real hardship.
Yeah, I mean, I think the biggest issue that it shows in one of the articles that I was reading is, what we don't have alternatives to maintain food safety at this point. So if you're going to ban single-use plastics, what are we doing in our grocery stores around things that require single-use plastics at the moment to maintain safety? I know there's a number of different sectors of agriculture that rely on it for various different uses, and they're all looking at it as well, going, okay, but now what, right? And so again, I just think if these changes are something that we want to do and are necessary, then there needs to be a process that you follow around, okay, well, what's our alternative? How do we develop an alternative? Let's get that in place before we start throwing bans in. And, food safety is a big concern, right? That's got to be number one priority, right? We can't be sacrificing that in any of these.
Yeah, that kind of trumps all, right?
So I think it's just nice to see that the Prime Minister was having meetings and listening to the discussion, and industry needs to be there to guide in this case, and I think they are.
Lindsay, I hate paper straws. I'm gonna get a T-shirt made of that.
Is there anyone who likes them? And also on the grand scheme of things, you get handed a giant plastic cup with a paper straw. What?
Yeah.
I feel like, should we not go the other way? I don't know. It's never made sense.
The other thing, Lindsay, is that I'm getting handed 2 or 3 paper straws because they're like, here's 2 or 3 because we know your first one's not going to make it to the thing. So now we're using 3 straws. So I'd be curious to know what the math is on that in terms of.
And again, this comes down to where we can't assume what's better, right? Because yes, trees, we can plant more trees, we can grow more trees. That doesn't mean it's a zero sum, right? Trees still have to be grown. They take time. You still have to process them into paper. At times, a plastic option could be, if done correctly, actually environmentally the better option. So we can't just assume, and people do this all the time to agriculture and we get so ticked about it, you can't just assume that if something seems better, it is. We need to follow it through and do a life cycle analysis, and ultimately in the end, is a plastic straw really the worst thing? Perhaps not. So I would like to see the full evaluation.
That's a great point, Lindsay. There was some research done in the U.S. a couple of years ago looking at grocery bags and the carbon footprint of a grocery bag, a traditional plastic one versus one of these cotton or organic cotton bags. And I believe you had to use. They found that you had to reuse one of those reusable bags If it wasn't organic, it was like in the tens of thousands of times. And if it was organic, it was like in the 20s or 30s thousands of times to actually mitigate offset that's how many single-use plastic bags you could use before your carbon footprint matched it on a life cycle basis. It's exactly that. Like, and nobody, from a food safety perspective, who's reusing their bag tens of thousands of times?
Are you kidding me?
Going to make that up. It was like mind-blowing numbers. Yeah. There's a Planet Money episode on this that you can find in the archives.
And if I may, there's also, like in the fast fashion world, we talk about, the sweater is made of a recycled bottle. Well, but a recycled bottle can be recycled and recycled and recycled. Once you make it a shirt, it goes into a landfill. So you actually end this process of the cycle around. And reusable bags, I wash mine. People don't. They are potentially a food safety issue if you don't wash your bags, and they don't last that long, and half the time they're made of polyester, which is just plastic anyway. Stop the madness, everyone. Anyway.
One point we should make here, though, the federal court last week did overturn the Canadian government's ban on single-use plastic, although the government has said they're going to appeal it. So the court basically said that the government's argument that these plastics are toxic wasn't a reasonable argument. So there is potentially a bit of a pivot or a turn back here that we'll have to follow as this discussion about plastics and where they get used in. We talk about food, but also in the healthcare industry. If you're ever in a medical clinic or hospital, think of all the things there too where plastic is used to keep things sanitized and clean. So, yeah, lots of stuff to be resolved here.
I just want to, we're running out of time here, but Stuart, as I mentioned earlier, I was at the Farm Management Canada Conference, Ag Excellence. I know you were there for the first part of it. I saw different people from MNP that gave a presentation on risk management. Decent crowd there. I was at last year's in Canmore too. Really good agenda. I actually had somebody come with me last year that was outside of the industry that said it was one of the best business conferences they had been to, because you could apply a lot of the principles to small business as well. We got to get more people going to stuff like that. Like, there was some really, really good discussions, and I had a few people ask me, how do you move the needle to get more people interested in attending a farm business management kind of style conference? Because there's definitely a need for more of that kind of learning.
Yeah, absolutely, Sean. Heather Watson does a great job with the Farm Management Canada team out of Ottawa, and these conferences are needed. We continue to see all sorts of data from the report you were going over while you were on live on the air at the show, that farm management is not where it needs to be on a larger scale, right? And it is important. I mean, yes, it's important to understand how to raise livestock, how to grow crops, but at the end of the day, there has to be money there to pay the bills. And if you don't understand how to make all that happen, you're not going to be successful as a farmer. So important. It's not an exciting topic. We know that, but we do need to find ways to get people more engaged. And I think, one of the things that I would say is encouraging is that we're seeing more young people coming to this and paying attention and showing interest. So that's a good thing for the future of the industry.
Absolutely. Yeah, I very, very much agree. Okay, and that's also going to be more important too as margins tighten in 24 and beyond. Basically looks what some of that trend is at this point. Hey, Lindsay, have yourself a great weekend.
You as well.
Take care of those sheep. Also, Calvin, we'll talk to you later.
Thank you. Take care, everyone.
And Stuart, I know you're going to try to have a good weekend, but do the Oilers play? Because that's just going to really, really ruin. That's going to be a total buzzkill.
I'm going to the game on Sunday. I haven't decided yet whether I'm taking a brown paper bag with me or not, but we'll see.
It reminds me of last week when the Bears lost to the Lions and they blew a 12-point lead with 3.5 minutes to go. There's a guy that called into the post-game show and said, I don't even live in Chicago. I chose this misery. I can identify very, very much. Okay, everybody, if you have any feedback, send me an email, shaney@realagriculture.com. Thank you so much for getting real and getting connected with Real Ag Radio. Chat again next week. Cheers, everybody.